The Animal Family, Chapter 4, The Bear, Part 2. And so it was that when the hunter had gone inside the cave and touched the bear, that the bear didn't move. But all at once, the hunter straightened up, took a step toward the mermaid, and started to laugh. Hearing his echoing cough down there in the darkness of the cave was frightening to the mermaid, but he had such a relieved sound that she cried out, "He isn't dying? He's all right?" "He's never been better off in his life," said the hunter. "I forgot you didn't know. He's just asleep. He's asleep for the winter." "For the winter?" said the mermaid. "Yes, bears sleep all winter. You know how fat he's been getting? Well, he'll lie there fast asleep till spring, unless there's a warm spell," said the hunter. "And it's all right for him to breathe like that?" "That's the way they all do it. You can't wake them. Watch." He got a hold of the bear below the shoulders, pulled him up as far as he could, and began to shake and shake him. He shook, and then gave a tremendous shout, one that made the mermaid's ears ring. But not even the bear's breathing changed. "How queer," said the mermaid. "How queer. Oh, I'm so glad he's all right." The hunter lowered the bear to the ground, patted him affectionately, and then climbed out of the cave. The mermaid said, "I think I'll pat him too." And so she did. And then she said sorrowfully, "He won't be with us all winter? Every winter?" The hunter remembered something the mermaid had said about her sister, and he said, laughing, "He was here all summer. Why do you want him here all winter too?" "Oh, I don't know. I'm used to him." They often talked about him that winter. Occasionally the hunter would go out to the cave and come back with a cheerful, "Still fast asleep." Once the mermaid answered, "It's like that story of your mother's." "Like what?" "Like that story. You know, the Sleeping Beauty one. It's like having that Sleeping Beauty for a pet." They did miss him, and when at last one foggy morning in March there was a scratching at the door and a thin, grumpy, famished bear stuck his nose in over the threshold, they fed him thankfully. How he ate, and how he grew again. By the end of the summer he was so big that, when he ran, he looked like a bed galloping across the meadow. You could hardly believe that so big a thing could move so fast. The bigger the bear got, the wetter the bear got, and there is nothing so noticeable as a wet bear. It rained on the bear forded streams, and the bear fished. He would sit or stand in the little river that came down to the sea, with the water boiling up over his back, and snap or bat at the fish swimming up through the white water. And, finally, when the rain was over, the river crossed, the fish eaten, the bear would come home. The first year it was like having a wet St. Bernard come home. The second year he was more like a wet Shetland pony. The third year he was like a wet horse in a wet overcoat. Drying him was like drying a marsh. They could have taken everything in the house, rubbed him with it, and in the end, they and everything in the house would have been wet and the bear still not dry. He would sit by the fireside in a little pool of water. His fur would steam, and the pool of water would steam. Steam would cover the glass of the windows, and he would start to shake himself. "No, no, no, no!" the hunter and the mermaid would shout, and the bear, their trained bear, wouldn't shake himself. He had learned what when they shouted, "No, no," it meant he mustn't shake himself. Outside, of course, he did. The hunter had once measured, on the beach, the circle the bear made when he shook himself. From the wet center to the impact of the last scattered drops was 17 steps. The bear's life was placid and uneventful, and he snored or shuffled or galloped through it, grunting in satisfaction. Occasionally, though, he met with accident. One warm, soft afternoon, the hunter and the mermaid were sitting inside talking when the bear burst through the doorway, bounded to the bed, and thrashing and plunging, tried to dig himself in under the bearskin. Just behind him was a cloud of bees. "Bees!" cried the hunter, slapping his neck. "Bees!" said the mermaid. Then she gave a shriek and clutched her shoulder. Another bee had landed. The hunter seized her, heaved her up into his arms, and staggered out the door. As he ran, he heard the bear groaning. Some of the bees must have got in under the bearskin. There were dozens of them just behind the hunter and the mermaid. "Oh!" screamed the mermaid as one of them caught up. The hunter ran very awkwardly and very fast across the meadow to the beach. The tide was in. He splashed through the shallow water, gave 2 desperate plunges that carried them out waist deep, and then fell headlong. The mermaid, flying out of his arms, disappeared into the next wave. Almost before they could get their heads out of the water, the bees were on them, snorting and blowing. His eyes and nose full of seawater, the hunter heaved and plunged and splashed. A perfect fountain of water and spray rose over him. The mermaid imitated him faithfully for a moment, then lost her balance, fell over, and began to splash as hard as she could with her tail. For the bees, it was like trying to get at 2 geysers under sea. Wet, cold, and discouraged, they began to make larger and larger circles around the 2, and a few of them even turned back toward the beach. "We're getting them! Splash, splash!" shouted the hunter. In 5 minutes, the last bee was flying sulkily over the beach toward the meadow, and the hunter was sitting there panting, with the water up to his neck. And the mermaid was laughing. She laughed so hard that she strangled, stopped till she could get her breath, and then started to laugh all over again. The hunter began to laugh himself. "We're getting them! Splash, splash!" cried the mermaid, pointing at the hunter and laughing harder than ever. "If that's the way you take it," said the hunter, "I won't give you any advice next time." The mermaid answered, "Just so long as you carry me. How'd you ever get us here so fast?" she said. The hunter said, "I must have been inspired. Oh, that bear of ours. Either we've got to train him to leave the bee trees alone, or else we've got to keep the door shut. Let's teach him to run for the beach instead of his bear skin. We can tell him, 'You're a big bear now.'" "I'll see how it is up at the house," the hunter said. He was soon back. "There are still dozens flying in and out of the door. I don't know where he is. You can see they're just doing it out of habit. They'll be gone by sunset." That night, as the 2 of them were sitting by the fire, all serene except for the clay they'd put on their stings, something began scratching at the door. The hunter opened it, and the bear came in. Evidently, he had ended in the water himself. He was sodden wet, but the water hadn't washed away the big gummy smears of honey and the beeswax on his head and shoulders. There were dead bees caught in his fur, too, still. He sat down and began to lick his right front paw. The bare palm had several swollen places on it where the bees had stung him. "Just look at his poor nose," said the mermaid. It was so swollen that, like a man with the mumps, the bear didn't even resemble himself. And yet he didn't look dissatisfied or miserable, but just sat by them licking his fur, as if he were home and glad to be home. The harder he licked, the more of a mess he made of himself. As the fire got his wet fur warmer and warmer, a little cloud of steam rose above him. He smelled like 4 or 5 wet dogs and a beehive. Before long, his contented, shining eyes began to get a blurred look. "He's had a full day," the hunter said. "If he's got as much honey inside of him as he has on his outside, he is a full bear," the mermaid replied. "And wax, and bees. Remember, bears eat bees, too. Is there anything anybody in the whole world eats that they don't eat? Have we ever found a single thing that bear won't eat?" "Oh, wood," said the hunter. "If it's dead wood, though, he turns it over and rips it up and eats all the grubs and bugs inside. But if it's a live tree, he just bats at the branches till he's got all the nuts off, and then he eats them. And if it's spring, he eats the buds and the blossoms and the bark on the—" "You're right," the hunter said. The bear's eyes had now closed, and he began to snore. It was a gentle, peaceable sound. He looked as if he had spent the day dozing by the fireplace. "He's got a real gift for getting along in the world," the hunter said admiringly. "Doesn't he look so innocent?" the mermaid said. "To think we used to live without the bear."